Welcome back to LogiSYM 2021, the future of cold chain logistics in Asia Pacific. That's the title of this panel session, and I think it's interesting. I chaired a cold chain session a few years ago, in fact, at LogiSYM, and at one point there was more people on stage than in the audience, and that's how it was. The interest was a few years ago, but I think a certain virus has just changed all that, about a year ago. And most days, if you open up the newspaper, you'll see some reference to cold chain. So that's been a really, really dramatic change. And I think I'm sure we'll see a lot of interest in this panel session, which will be helmed and moderated by Michael Culme-Seymour, who is Vice President and Managing Director Asia Pacific at Roambee. So, Michael, I'm going to hand it over to you, and all the best for the session.
Thank you very much, Bob, and thank you, LogiSYM, for inviting us today to give our opinions and discuss the future of cold chain logistics. It's great to be here. Rather challenging and daunting because we're the sort of last session for questions and answers and the wrap-up, so we have to try to do our best. We have an esteemed panel today. I'd like to briefly introduce them. So we have Brett Marshall, who's the Corporate Head of Quality Assurance at Zuellig Pharma. I've read that Brett has spent almost 25 years in logistics and indeed 25 years in Asia, so that makes him a true Asian logistician. Welcome, Brett. Wallace Tay, Regional Director for SCHAEFER, also a veteran of 15 years of both material handling and logistics. Wallace, welcome to us. And Sheng, welcome, Sheng. You look as though you're sitting, I can't remember which company you work for, but I think it's quite obvious in your background. Head of Healthcare for CEVA Logistics, welcome. Sheng, another long, standing veteran, has done time, if I could say that, in TNT Healthcare, and even Zuellig Pharma as well. So welcome, Sheng. I think between the four of us, our combined logistics experience notches up to almost 95 years. So that makes us rather long in the tooth. But today we're going to talk about the future and the future of cold chain logistics. And whilst the world around us obviously is very much influenced today about COVID, I'd like to also talk about potentially what else is going to happen and what else is going to influence cold chain. We've seen in the recent months that we've surprised and we've I think met expectations in the logistics industry of delivering the well sort of expected and long-awaited COVID vaccines. I think that's going very well. But other things have affected the market, such as the chip shortage. Where does that lead us when we're running out of chips? Do we have enough medical devices? Do we have enough tracking devices? Do we have enough? There's a lot of pressure on the industry. We've seen that still the shipping industry is very much in disarray with disproportionate supply chains going on. So what effect does this have on the cold chain? We also, I think we understand that this is a long-term game. This is not a sprint. This is a marathon. We will be around managing this vaccine distribution and the supplies supporting that, I think, for the next 3 or 4 years, and potentially this will be an annual event. So really what I wanted to throw the first question out to the panel is, really how have we, the industry, the cold chain industry, prepared and responded to the additional demands that the COVID-19 vaccine distribution and indeed the pandemic and the supplies around it has thrown upon us. Perhaps I'll direct the first question that to Sheng, because obviously CEVA is in the front of distributing, and then afterwards pass on to Brett to get Zuellig's procedure, and then finally to Wallace. So Sheng, over to you.
Yeah, I think definitely this past COVID situation has tremendously impacted our industry. I think first and foremost, I would say it's about infrastructure. I mean, with all of this temperature-controlled air cargo moving around the world, We not only need a new generation of the warehouse, a cold chain warehouse, but also the air freight centers, the handling centers in the global airport. We need the cold rooms to stage the shipment, do staffing, unstaffing, and then do a little bit, unforwarding. So I think the company like mine, where I'm investing around 45 new cold chain centers around the world, this is actually the show of the industry, how we're actually investing in actually building up the capability. I think a second thing I feel that is making a great impact is the lingo of our air freight industry is changing. In the past, as a freight forwarder, we are very preoccupied with the so-called on-time performance. Deliver goods on time, in good condition, then we are good. But this COVID situation triggered a new thinking. There's a new language called compliance becoming fast mainstream. So we have to, apart from moving the cargo from point A to point B, we have to figure out how to do it in a compliant way, in a pharmaceutical healthcare kind of a quality system. So specific example is how to validate a lane, how to do the risk assessment, how to actually validate your vendor, validate your trucks, and how to document the whole things. Yeah. So the whole compliance is actually becoming a quite important aspect. But overall, I think because of the drive on the absolute service performance and actually the compliance, quality compliance, I think it's a good thing. It's really lifting up the industry standard overall. Yeah. I think, if I'm not to the third thing is, I think the previously I think this monitoring, control, and preventative action is also taking to a new level. COVID vaccine is you are not dealing with a point A to point B type of a distribution anymore. You are actually talking about the global transportation network. One of the pharma companies are talking about they're concurrently running around 190 lanes. So the traditional CS agent monitoring the shipment, that kind of a model is not going to valid anymore. Yeah. So we're talking about the new generation of control towers using the digital tools, automated workflows to really proactively monitoring the shipment. So the whole space of the control tower and monitoring is actually taken on to the new level. I think in the long run, I think this trend will stay. It will definitely transform the way we move the cargoes around the world in a very secure, compliant, and highly visible way.
Thank you, Sheng. Good points there, particularly around infrastructure and compliance. And that's a good segue, Brett, to move over to you. I mean, obviously your role is all about compliance and quality assurance, and Zuellig is, of course, at the forefront of delivering many of the COVID vaccines across Asia. So how is Zuellig managed this challenge so far, and what else does it need to do to make sure we stay ahead of the curve?
Thanks, Michael. I think we've been operating around Asia for the best part of 100 years. So in that time, we've seen a number of disruptive events in terms of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions and floods and typhoons and those types of things. So we're fairly well accustomed to having put in place and established pretty robust infrastructure and also building people and process around those. And I think that's the way that we look at it. It's an ecosystem. So I think for the existing portfolio of cold chain products that we've been distributing, that infrastructure is very well established, and the processes and the training programs that we put in place are compliant with international standards, as Sheng was talking about. And I think one of the areas that we've traditionally been strong in that cold chain area, infrastructure, the packaging systems we use, the vehicles that we used, and as Sheng mentioned, the the qualification and validation around those. But I think the COVID component, certainly as we start to see products with different temperature ranges that need to be handled, the mRNA vaccines and the sub-zero requirements at either -80 or -20. So where we had established capability and capacity for the 2 to 8 degrees, we've had to move in or establish capacity also for those other temperature ranges. And it's not just the infrastructure, but also the packaging systems, and then the ability to train the people to be able to work with these new products and be able to deliver to a slightly different customer base with COVID vaccines, because obviously most of these vaccines are being purchased by governments. So it's working quite closely with governments on how their vaccination rollout plans will operate and how we can support those with the infrastructure, the people, the process that we've established around that.
Great. Yeah, all very good. And thank you, Brett. It was interesting this morning. I watched a short clip on the BBC about an African country actually publicly destroying vaccines that had run out of validation, expired vaccines, just to prove to their citizens that they take this seriously, that vaccines have to remain in obviously in date and also valid storage. So we'll come back to that later, because I know that Zuellig is in the forefront of compliance and also making sure that the vaccines are real and anti-counterfeit and so forth. Both yourself and Sheng have mentioned infrastructure, really important. So Wallace, I think this is a good segue to SCHAEFER, to yourself. I mean, how has SCHAEFER responded to this massive demand in this part of the world of rapidly selling up, cold chain depots, which is not easy. You can't just build them overnight. So what has your company been doing as a response to this pandemic, and how have you been helping?
Yeah, thanks, Bob. I think thanks for the question. I think to respond to what Brett and Sheng is saying. I mean, we saw revolving about processes, compliance, for example. Our client has been coming to us and say, hey, look, yes, you need a stacker cranes and automated storage warehouse environment. We have been doing this for the last 50 years. I mean, this is something standard. But right now, it's something very different. It's a different arena together. We talk about compliance. We talk about, hey, look, if you build a system like this, how can you help us? How can you enable us? The customer is always coming up to us with those questions. When we're talking about enabling, we're talking about how do they enable them to track? How can we be enabled for them to for example, to keep track of the products coming in and out and not making any mistakes? How can we prevent wastages, for example, product damages and things like that? So these are some of the things that they have come to us. And one very important thing is that analytics. How can we provide information, right, to them to make the correct information, the correct decision? In the logistic environment where Brett is and Sheng is doing, is that it's always a JIT, especially in the vaccine. I mean, in the COVID-19 today, the environment that we're exposed to. They want to know what kind of technologies we can introduce to them, apart from those that we know that we have been providing in the last 50 over years. How can we provide to them a more smarter solution so that they can make the correct decision to do the right replenishment, for example. Right. So these are some of the so-called requirements that they'll be asking and coming to us. And fortunately, I think as we speak, the one cold store that we have completed, that is in the Philippines. I thought actually they use their cold store environment to store the vaccination that they receive from China, for example. So these are some of the examples that we've been doing today.
Yeah. Interesting points, Wallace. And I know that during this conference, LogiSYM has had a panel of experts talking about robotics, AI, digitalization of the future, and it's very it's very important, especially when people are unable to go to warehouses and pick and pack, and it's because of situations like this. So perhaps we can come back to that later. So I wanted to move on to the second question, which is really all about technology. Often in times of crisis, innovation is pushed, extraordinary. There's funds available. Technological innovation comes about a lot faster than so-called peacetime. And so I really wanted to talk to you about what technical changes have you seen within your company? What innovative solutions have you come up with in order to help not just the COVID pandemic, but the cold chain industry in itself? So again, maybe Brett, we can start with you this time.
Thanks, Michael. I think it's fascinating. I mean, we've been looking at the pace of implementation of technology in the pharma industry over the past decade. It hasn't been one of the fast movers when you compare it with some of the other industries like fast-moving consumer or electronic or fashion or those types of industries. But certainly the last 12 to 18 months, we've really seen technology start to be implemented quite rapidly. And even, in the pharma manufacturing side of things, where you see a vaccine can be developed and brought to commercial quantities in 12 to 18 months as against a 5 to 10 year horizon previously. So technology is certainly having a big impact on the industry. One of the areas that we saw a big change was, I guess, in terms of last mile and customer facing technologies, to be able to continue serving patients and customers, particularly where there are scenarios of lockdown and sometimes outlets being closed, people being less confident about visiting doctors and hospitals and those types of things. So continuing to be able to provide the healthcare needs has seen a sharpening of the customer focusing technology, the order processing, the payment collection. We use a platform called EasyRx for both those areas. Even being able to build a solution for telemedicine, which we did in the Philippines, which has been one of the countries hardest hit by the lockdown. And Easy Consult, really putting the link between doctor and pharmacy and patient so that healthcare can continue to be provided. But I think also in terms of the packaging systems that we use and the temperature monitoring devices that I think we kind of touched on earlier, and how all these systems integrate and communicate in a way that, Sheng talked about moving to a control tower environment. Certainly we've seen some early iterations of that type of capability, and I think that will continue to mature. But really, I think there's still a lot of work for us to do in terms of how we integrate the multiple systems that exist and start to build build in the disruptive capabilities of machine learning and artificial intelligence and robotic process automation into how we manage the data sets from those integrated solutions. And that will give us a great opportunity in terms of our risk management capability and managing our cold chain facilities and maintaining product integrity, maintaining patient safety with a much higher degree of effectivity than may be available with the less diverse technologies today.
Yeah, no, that all good points, Brett, and absolutely patient safety, at the center of all that. And again, I think Zuellig has come up with some very good innovations, to sort of speed that innovation gap up. Sheng, moving on to you and CEVA. I mean, obviously, CEVA is not only managing vaccine distribution, but you're also managing a lot of perishables, really critical supplies, food. Again, many countries have ensured that their food supplies need to continue because there's a whole, different demand on different kinds of foods. How have you seen that change, and what sort of technologies have CEVA brought in to try to drive that management?
Yeah, actually, it's I hear Brad was mentioning about the technologies such as tracking devices and how to bring it into the integration. I think this is very much what we see in CEVA as well. In the freight forwarding world, and the technologies like trackers, even IoT devices are nothing new. But what is new is how to integrate this into the mainframe operating system and using this technology to trigger real operational action. Yeah. So this is something that CEVA is actually deploying a control tower solution where we actually integrate the IoT, the temperature and location data from the IoT devices, and then design an automated workflow solution to really trigger actions. For example, if there is a temperature deviation excursion happened, this auto trigger may actually generate a deviation reports sent to the QA team automatically. It could trigger a hold, put on hold the status, and this instruction goes to the destination operation team to put this shipment under quarantine. So this is actually the real example where we use these pieces of technology and integrate into the operation process. And I think this is happening right now. Yeah. I think that there is a second piece of technology that in the freight forwarding world is using is actually the predictive data analytics, right? Previously, when we're actually planning a new traffic lane for a pharma company, we have to do a rounds of operational qualification, trial shipment, gather the data, get QA sign off. It takes months, yeah, to just get the QA sign off. Now we're using a digital tool, basically using the big data to really simulate the real transit environment around the world, and using this big data to calculate the risk scoring for a particular shipment in the particular configuration, and then calculate how the risk exposure like in the entire journey and by touch points. Those are the digital tools. We can drastically shorten the QA validation time from like previously months into days, if not hours. Yeah. So those are the things that we see is really transforming the way we run this freight operation.
Thank you, Senji. All good points. I think Wallace, moving on to you. I mean, Shenji has raised some good points there. Control tower solutions, automated workflows, triggering actions. I think these are some of the things that you were talking about your smart warehouses. So how is SCHAEFER responding to the technological demand of the forwarders, of your clients? How are you integrating smart warehouses with logistics solutions?
Well, I think what Senji mentioned earlier on is precisely, he's looking at the external parameters. Now coming into the warehouse, this is exactly what the customer is expecting us to do, to have complete transparency of what the warehouse is doing. And as you know, that the warehouse has moved from the olden days with the conventional to the fully automated system right now. And a lot of these requirements have sort of they've upskilled their workers to the next arena. Now, in terms of technology-wise, they want to reduce manhandling. For example, goods, they want the people to go to the warehouse, pick up the goods. They want the goods to be delivered to them. And we call this technology called goods to person, for example. And obviously, goods to person is not something new. It has been around for many years, but it's a technology, the movement that we bring. For example, using AMR technology, right? The automatic mobile robotics to bring the shelves to you, and then you have a huge selectivity of the products that you can pick from. And obviously, they are not picking just purely what is presenting to them. And we need to add on technologies, for example. Let's say on the shelf, we have about 10 items on the shelves, for example. They have a light that is shining and portraying to the exact products for him to offer, for example. And also to pick how many pieces. And they drop off to another conveyor, and then we have a weighing system to make sure that he or she do not do excessive pick. So these are some of the very, I would say, smart way of doing things, and without having to rely too much on the human intervention to make a decision. So the decision is made purely by the system. And why is this important? Because remember, just like what I mentioned, the track and the trace of the products moving in the warehouse. All this information is going back to what we call we call it the lighthouse, right? The lighthouse meaning to say actually have an overview of what the warehouse is operating is, and then translate that into data, helping, for example, the people, the management to make collective or correct decision on when to replenish, and able to also identify what are the products that is fast movers versus the slow movers, for example, when to replenish. And these are some of the decisions that the system is able to enable the customer to do. So, of course, I will not go into what kind of technologies. Of course, there are all the peripherals that can help and enable the people on the ground to do their work more effectively and more productively.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it's exciting times. We'll just take a little break here, and I would welcome and remind the participants, people listening in, that please do send in your questions. We've got a fantastic panel here. They're all keen to answer your questions. Stefan Brown, thank you for asking. You've asked a question. What do you think about virtual cold chain to support your digital lane risk assessments? If I understand that correctly, and perhaps you can type an answer if I got it wrong, it basically is something that Sheng has just suggested, where you're taking a lot of big data of historical data on lanes, and you're looking at the historical performance on those lanes in those specific carriers and days of the week and months of the year to see where the risks lie. Sheng, have I got that right? Is that's what CEVA is doing? You're on mute.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is what I just mentioned. I think there is increase. There is quite a number of the digital solutions already coming on board to support this sort of virtual cold chain thing. I think it's definitely going to make a lot of impact on the way we run the validations in the freight environment.
Yeah, and certainly, I mean, not only is it smarter, but it's a lot more sustainable. If you don't have to send empty boxes of water around to validate a lane, and you're using big data and AI, that's much better.
Right. I'm actually, Michael, a huge fan of this and the potential for this type of tool. I think one of the challenging things from a pharma perspective is still that we have in the qualification process this distinction between operational qualification and performance qualification, and performance qualification generally still needs to represent a physical performance of the worst case in terms of the transit lanes you select. So we've certainly seen this type of capability expanding in its use. I think in the future it will become more so. I think we still need to be able to get the industry on side with us to be able to reduce the kind of qualification burden around that performance qualification, which, as Sheng said, it takes a lot of effort to do.
Yeah, great. Let me ask another question. Chris Crawley, thank you very much. So basically, Chris's question is around, I think, last mile delivery in an increasing disruptive world. We live in part of the world where we have a lot of natural disasters. We've got climate change. We've got a large amount of population moving from urbanization. I'll go back to Brett. Zuellig, how is Zuellig managing this last mile distribution with these additional challenges?
Yeah, I think that's one area that we've seen develop quite strongly over the last 5 years is the use of passive packaging systems and the technologies that are being used. So, traditional packaging systems would have been a combination of styrofoam and ice blocks or ice gels, and we still ran those through the different levels of qualification before use. But the modern technologies are much more around using phase change materials, which have a greater degree of stability in their temperature management capabilities. And these used in conjunction with vacuum insulated panels in a packaging system which has a much more effective, much more stable and reliable temperature maintenance capability. Also, it extends the period of temperature maintenance from what would traditionally be between 36 and 48 hours out to 96 to 120 and sometimes even longer in terms of number of hours, depending on how you freeze or prepare the panels. So it's actually given us a much more effective capability for managing that last mile, and also with a high degree of reusability. We first started using these systems in 2015, and 5-6 years later, we still have about 75% of the original units in use, and they have had many hundreds of repetitions of use. Way beyond what the traditional styrofoam and ice gel, ice block solution would have. So I think you take those packaging systems in conjunction with the improving technologies. I do make a distinction between, when we're talking about real-time temperature monitoring, between real-time capture and real-time alert, and certainly real-time capture has given us a tremendous capability if we're able to use that data for risk assessment. But the real-time alert capability remains a little elusive because of the technology platforms that exist in the country, in the Asia-Pac region in particular. So we're still heavily reliant on the telecommunications infrastructure, which doesn't necessarily give us the degree of reliability on real-time alert that we would like. And where you can have alerts at 1 hour or 2 hours when you're in a cross-border situation, so an international flight or an international shipping lane, when you're doing a metropolitan delivery, a real-time alert that you're receiving an hour after the event is really too late to do anything about. So,
yep.
So that's a future development that we'll continue to look to be able to achieve. But I think overall, despite the growing complexity, I think our capability is also improving.
Okay, all good points, Brett. Thank you. And I think, it is a question of time. I mean, we still are dependent, of course, telecommunications, and the more remote that we're delivering downstream, that will be a challenge. I think, thank you everyone for your questions. Tim Foote, thank you. I hope that Brett answered your question, which is basically around what new technologies are coming out. I think Brett illustrated some of the new technologies there. So hopefully he answered your question. I think we got time for one more discussion point, and that is really around the shift of manufacturing. We've seen recently in Singapore, 2 major pharmaceutical companies have announced that they're establishing production here to create and produce vaccines. We feel that that the world is changing, that there are more the vaccine production is becoming either national or regional, and no longer are we depending on 2 or 3 super vaccine production centers. How are we prepared for that? How are we prepared for that in the region in terms of infrastructure, in terms of support, and what do we need to do in order to support this shift in manufacturing? And perhaps, Wallace, if I can turn to you, what is SCHAEFER doing in terms of planning to support this shift in manufacturing and for the region?
Good question, actually. So what is happening right now, we are also working with the government right now, especially hospitals. As you know that early on we talk about, I put it maybe quickly, we call it a micro-fulfillment kind of center that we try to adopt with hospitals. Now what does that mean is that apart from the main DC that coming over or after manufacturing, as you're aware that there are multiple ways of how they're going to deliver the vaccines, whether for local supply or for overseas supply. And it becoming the fact whereby the integrity of the vaccines that they do transport mode has with them. And we are working with them to say, okay, on the back end, beside the manufacturing, how do we build a warehouse to support the temperature that they can maintain the integrity of the vaccines, which is often, we know Pfizer is minus 70 degrees, and today technologies, we can do up to minus 25 or 30 degrees. And how do we actually close up the gap? Of course, there are many talks about how do we store now the cooling boxes, right? After produce, they put the vaccines in the cooling boxes and they put into a normal palletized products and put it up. And then on the outbound per se, whether it's going to the air freight or it's going by the local delivery, how do we actually work together with the local transportation parties? I think it is not about one party, or it's not about the company who is manufacturing over here. It actually goes into a full switch of supply chain stakeholders to work together to maintain the integrity of the products. So what we are doing right now is that apart from just providing storage solution, but we have to provide also how do we track what is leaving the warehouse, what kind of labels, is it QR code, is it good enough, or do we introduce we call it the previous technology, the RFID per se, to make sure that all these so-called products are carefully tracked and traced on the movement between points. Yeah.
That's great. Thanks, Wallace. And I'm sure this is a long-term investment as well from your side. That's brilliant. Sheng, how is CEVA gearing up to this shift in manufacturing, towards more sort of national and regional manufacturing?
Yeah, I think that definitely once the vaccine distribution moved to the Asia and become an intra-Asia, we are dealing with a totally different set of capability and a different set of supply chain ecosystem. So there's no more like a global freight forwarders. Yeah, we're talking about a lot of trackers, local last mile delivery agents. Yeah, all the beautiful things we talk about, the compliance, the technology. Basically, the issue boils down how to really implement it through this much more diversified group of local service providers. So that's really the big challenge. Yeah. In CEVA, what we are doing is two things, I think. Number one is drive the compliance. So we're actually using our GDP guidelines to really develop those checklists to really qualify and pre-qualify and re-qualify our trackers, our last mile service providers, and then document all of this qualification process. Yeah, so that's one of them. That's one process we're currently undertaking right now. Second, we're using digital tools, basically measure them. Yeah. So I think this is where in CEVA we have this transportation management tool where we can plug in multiple different vendors into this platform. We job they're picking all the delivery orders to their mobile phones, and we can actually track them by status. So this is where all of these trackers, last mile delivery guys, is actually being measured by the actual performance, how fast they send back the shipping, the confirmation, and sometimes we even ask them to use a mobile phone to take the picture on the delivery and send it back to our control towers. So this is a way we are currently managing a mix of diversified delivery agents to provide the service. It's still not perfect, but I think this is a kind of miniature way that we are trying to manage the complexity in Asia. Yeah.
Thanks, Sheng. It sounds as though it's also a shift in human capital demand. I mean, we have two challenges. One, we need to upskill a lot of our colleagues in the logistics industry to manage this new challenge of managing vaccines. Secondly, borders are closed, so we're not getting the staff numbers that we needed and that we enjoyed in the past, and that I think it goes across all Asian countries. So we certainly have our work cut out for us. Brett?
Michael, just a couple of quick comments on that, because I think Asia's been kind of in a difficult position, as we know, getting available supplies of vaccines, and one of the reasons for that is because the industry was short in capacity for sterile manufacturing, production, and fill and finish even before COVID came along. So certainly those types of capabilities need to be established in the region, but it's not just the manufacturing capacity, it's the ability to also source the raw materials and the excipients, and there are some supply constraints around those as well. So different levels of supply chain need to be managed there, and also in terms of the packaging, the vials, the types of vials that are used, stoppers and the ancillary equipment, which we also need to think about. So it's going to be a very much different, very challenging supply chain planning and management capability that needs to be established, and it needs to be established in a number of countries.
Yeah, all good points. Fantastic. Well, look, gentlemen, we're running out of time. We've got 2 minutes left, and I don't see any new questions on the Q&A. Any last comments? I think from my side, I think we've done, the industry itself has done an incredible job to respond. I think we're learning as we're doing. I think we're being proactive. I think the innovation and the technology is rapidly increasing. And I think it's a massive opportunity for us as an industry to step up and respond and help those in need. So, from my side, thank you very much to all of you for your contributions. I think if there's any questions from the participants, you've got our details. Please, write to us directly or through LogiSYM. And that's it from my side. So, any last comments from you, gentlemen?
No, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Good discussion.
Exciting times ahead.
Thank you. Over to you, Bob.
Thank you very much, Michael, and to Brett and Wallace and Sheng. Thanks again for all your insights on the cold chain industry. And we'll close the session now. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.